Buenas, espero que ustedes se encuentren bien. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre el pronombre vos. So today we are going to talk about the pronoun vos. Now this means you, which means that it is the second person singular and it is informal, so it's just like two. And this is mostly associated with countries like Argentina and Uruguay. But it is worth noting that it is used in many other Spanish-speaking countries. But in those countries, the use is going to be restricted to specific regions. For example, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia. Bolivia, right? I was sort of mixing the pronunciations between Spanish and English. But anyways, yes. So it is used throughout the Spanish-speaking world. But the most popular countries in which you will hear this pronoun are going to be Argentina and Uruguay, right? So as I said, vos means you, second person, singular pronoun, and it is informal. So the use of vos is called voseo. And the use of tú to mean you, the singular form you, is called tuteo. So those are just some background details. Now, when it comes to vos, it is worth noting that vos is only going to have a special conjugation in two particular scenarios. The first scenario is going to be the present indicative. If we're using the verb in the present indicative, then vos is going to necessitate that a change is made. Or is going to require that a change is made to the verb. Whereas the imperative, not whereas, similarly, the imperative form requires a change. And you will see that both conjugations are actually pretty similar. So that means that in all other situations, we're going to use the to form. The to is going to be the default conjugation. But in these particular instances, they're going to have, vos is going to have a special conjugation. All right? So yes, that is that. But before we get into the present indicative, I just want to give you some additional details. So vos can be used after prepositions, right? Like con, para, por, etc. For example, tengo que hablar con vos. I have to speak with you. Or no vamos a viajar sin vos. So we are not going to travel without you. So you can use it after prepositions as an object. But vos cannot be used as an object pronoun. Te is going to be used. So in other words, I have to say, te voy a llamar. I am going to call you. I can't say vos voy a llamar. No. Te voy a llamar. Alright? So just bear that in mind, that vos cannot be used as an object pronoun, but it can be used after prepositions. Okay? Muy bien. Is that everything that I need to tell you before we get into the thing? Okay, yes. So I alluded to this earlier, but I was still giving an example. So because it's only the present indicative and imperative forms that change, all other times or moods will default to two. So if I want to say you spoke very fast, I would say vos hablaste muy rápido, right? So we would use the to conjugation. But I think you already know that based on what I said previously. All right, so let's get into the conjugations. So to form the present indicative form of the verb, the R is removed from the infinitive form and S is added. However, an accent is placed on the last vowel. So it's simple. We have hablar, and this applies to all three verbs, AR, IR, and and ER, okay? So hablar, we remove the R, we add S, and then we put an accent on the last vowel, which is going to be A, so that the last syllable is stressed. So, vos hablas muy rápido. You speak very fast. Escribir becomes escribís because we remove the R and then we put an S and then we put an accent on the final vowel. So we have escribís, right? Marcos dice que vos escribís mucho. Marcos says that you write a lot. Who they say? Vender becomes vendes. Vos no vendes ropa. You do not sell clothes. So to form in present indicative, we remove the infinitive, we remove the R from the infinitive, and then we add S, and we put an accent on the last vowel. And that is how we are going to derive the vos form. Now, there are three irregularities. We have ser, ir, and haber. And the conjugations are going to be as follows. Sos, vas, and has, respectively. Sos is obviously for ser, ir is going to be vas, and has is going to be haber. So those are the only three irregular verbs that we have in the present indicative, okay? So, de donde sos? Where are you from? Instead of de donde eres. De donde sos? Soy de Barbados. De donde sos? Ir vas. Vos vas al supermercado. You go to the supermarket. Now, vas is obviously the same form, the same conjugation that is used for to, but this is irregular based on the pattern. Because remember, to form the present indicative, we have to eliminate the R, and then we have to eliminate the R, place an S afterwards, but we also have to put an accent on the last vowel. So that not technically, but if we were to apply that rule, it would actually be is. And it is not is. So obviously this is irregular, right? So vos vas al supermercado. And the last one, haber, vos has leído el periódico. You have read the newspaper. Now this is an example of the present perfect, which comprises the present indicative form of haber followed by the past participle. So that auxiliary verb haber has to be conjugated in the present indicative, right? So this is why we have vos has leído. You have read the newspaper. So those are the only three irregular verbs that we have in the present indicative, all right? Now, what happens when it comes to reflexive verbs or pronominal verbs? So what we do, as I said, vos is not used. Vos, the default is going to be to for most situations. So in the case of a pronominal, in the case of a pronominal verb like irse, right, which means to leave. So if I want to say you leave, I would have to say vos, and the reflexive pronoun obviously is going to be te, vos te, and what is the remainder? Ir, right? It is ir. So, in a case like that, we are going to say vos te vas. Vos te vas. Okay, because ir is irregular in the present indicative. So vos te vas, you leave. All right. So that's an example of a pronominal verb. What about a reflexive verb? So let's use despertarse. to wake up. So, vos te despertas. Vos te despertas. So we use te as a reflexive pronoun, and then the remainder despertar, we remove the R, right? And we put an S, and then we put an accent on the final vowel, which is A. So, vos te despertas. You wake up. So that's what we do when it comes to reflexive or pronominal verbs, okay? Muy bien. Now, what do we do when it comes to the imperative form? We already covered the present indicative, so this is going to be very easy. So the R is removed and an accent is placed on the last vowel. In other words, just remove the S. Essentially. So the imperative form is going to be the present indicative form without the S. See? Very simple. So, estudiar becomes estudiar. Estudiar. Estudia español, study Spanish. Yeah, I agree with that. Study Spanish. Comer becomes come. Come las papas fritas. Eat the fries. And venir becomes vení. Vení aquí. Come here. Now, as you know, venir in the to form is irregular, so that would be ven. So if we had to use to, it would be ven aquí. Ven aquí. And the others, those are regular verbs, right? Now, like the present indicative, the imperative form has an irregular verb, but this irregular verb is going to be ir, right? So in the imperative form, we're going to use anda or andar. Perdón. Solo tenía que aclararme la garganta. Pero no pasa nada. We use andar. We use the verb andar with ir, right? So, anda, and we have an accent on the final A, right? But it is worth noting that if we use reflexive pronouns, or we use pronouns with the imperative form, in the affirmative, we remove the accent. So anda becomes andate, right? The accent is removed. So let's use despertarse. It would be despertate. Despertate. Remember, we don't apply the internal change that we would with to, that we would do with to, but we have despertate. So desperta, but despertate. Once we put the pronoun at the end, the accent goes away. Okay? So yes, that is the affirmative. So what happens if it's negative? So in the negative, let's use despair. Let's use irse. In the negative form, the default is to. So I should say that this imperative form is restricted to the affirmative. In the negative, we're going to use the to form. So if I'm telling you, if I tell you not to leave, I would say no te vayas. Just like I would tell you if I were using to, right? So the negative imperative takes the to form, but the affirmative has its own conjugation, right? So that is something to remember. So for example, do not study Spanish, no estudies español, right? No estudies español, and that could apply to tú or vos. But in the affirmative, this pattern or this structure has to be utilized. Okay? Yes. Creo que eso es todo por hoy. Muchas gracias por mirar mis videos. Estoy seguro de que ustedes pueden usarlo con confianza. Hasta pronto.